episode 260 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I'm the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry, and we have a very, very special guest today. This is arguably, debatably, the preeminent prospect scout we have in the fantasy community. It's the man behind the rookie scouting portfolio. He's going to teach us everything we need to know about this incoming class. It is, of course, Matt Waldman of footballguys.com. Matt, how's it going?
Adam, it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you because I've certainly enjoyed your work over the years, and it's the first time we've had a chance to connect.
Yeah, this is going to be good because as regular listeners know, sitting around watching college football is not something I do on Saturday. Scouting is something I don't consider myself a skill. I think Matt is more in tune on the football side, whereas I try to keep my focus on the fantasy side of things. So I'm excited about this. We're 4 days removed from the 2019 draft, Matt. I'm curious, is it a time for you to exhale, or I guess how does it feel with the draft now in the rearview mirror, considering how much work you put into the actual draft?
Yeah, there's a bit of an echo for me at this point because what happens is the RSP's two publications in one. So the pre-draft comes out April 1st, and there's a lot of, obviously a year and a half of work that goes into that every year. And then there's the post-draft that comes out no later than a week after that. So I'm wrapping that up right now. So once that happens, I'm hoping it'll be out. It'll be out no later than Saturday, but I'm hoping it might be out a little sooner. I will definitely have a nice solid exhale. I get a little bit of coming up for air between, April 1st and the draft. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking forward to having like a good solid month and a half after that in the next couple of days.
For those people that don't know, you mentioned a year and a half process. Tell the people how you got into this prospect evaluation and kind of what your process is.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I came about it in a really roundabout way because, I was a musician when I first started off in college, and then I ended up doing a little bit of journalism and a little bit of freelance writing while I was actually just in operations management in a call center. That kind of gig grew and grew and grew because I was on it kind of in the forefront of when call centers started to become a thing. Mm-hmm. And so I learned this process basically on how to evaluate performance for, frontline employees and how they worked. And a lot of it was based on manufacturing and different types of industries and applied to it. And it was a really good process. I had to get trained on it for a week, and we had to pay a good bit of money for me to go and do that. And as I was developing all these types of evaluation monitoring techniques and kind of implementing them, I realized as a football fan, I was a lifelong football fan and new fantasy player in the mid 90s, that maybe this is something that I could apply one day to scouting talent and learn about the game even more. And that's really what I did. So the process is everything's really well defined in writing that I look for. It's scored using these best practices. And it turned out that it helped me develop my understanding of the game to a degree that I have, not only, media and fantasy players who follow, get the RSP, but I have people in the league who get the RSP and people who email me and say, I'm at the combine representing X team. 2 scouts were talking about you and about this type of thing, and just wanted to thank you because you helped me get a job with this SEC team from watching your YouTube videos. So it's like, it's really come full circle in a really weird way. And, when I first started this, a lot of people, I started in this industry as a kind of a fantasy writer, and people were like, what do you know? So it's been a really exciting process and a fun journey, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, I think as the NFL becomes more advanced and we're seeing like kind of the very beginning of the analytical age in NFL, I think more and more teams are open to fantasy, quote unquote, fantasy people, or people who are gambling, or people that are working really hard and looking at things specifically at a play level and charting plays and looking at things that down to the core. All right. Before we get started here, we're going to go through a bunch of players. Before we get started, I'm curious, does it frustrate you at all when you really like a player, you followed him for a year and a half, as you said, and then he lands in some terrible spot? I don't know if you even care, but like, I don't know. I know a lot of people like Miles Boykin, right? And then he lands in Baltimore, which I think by most people's declarations would be a pretty rough landing spot. Do you get frustrated by that, or is that just you used to it by now?
I mean, I still get frustrated occasionally here and there with certain things, but I kind of expect it, especially with wide receivers because there's so much variation in grading from team to team for the position. So you end up seeing situations where they fall or end up going somewhere. Like Stanley Morgan was a player that I really liked, the wide receiver out of Nebraska, and him winding up in Cincinnati is kind of a tough deal for him as an undrafted free agent. Or a guy like Emmanuel Butler or little Jordan Humphrey, who are two really good big slot players who are kind of under the radar. And I like the under the radar gems. And here they are on a team where the big slot player is Mike Thomas. So one of them's going to have to be able to play outside, and do either of them really have the speed to do it? So it's things like that that can be a little frustrating, but it's you kind of get used to it as time goes on.
I mean, it's possible that your evaluation wasn't wrong, but the scheme or the coaching staff was inept. Like, I don't know where you were on Jeff Janis, but I think that would be an example of somebody who a lot of the scouting community or analytics community thought had a big chance, but Green Bay just didn't feel the same way. So I guess that could be frustrating too.
Sure, certainly, and I mean, it's one of those situations where, you look at the way players grow. There's so much behind the scenes and beyond just the analytics or the tape, because in addition to that, you have character and you have professionalism, and you have these guys being, I don't know, in their early 20s, and think about you being in your early 20s, and then how you might handle like massive media exposure, fame, being recognized by people left and right, and the things that come with that when you're young, and you have opportunities that you might not otherwise have when you have those things going on with you, and the life gets a little bit faster and the money's flowing pretty easily, but it can get cut off quickly too, and then also the competition's really tight. So you got to be really professional too, because these guys are also left to their own devices in the NFL compared to the college game where they're monitored almost hourly during the day.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the players here. Everybody wants the takes on the players. That's what they're here for. I want to start with Miles Sanders because I think the Eagles have been one of the teams who are at the forefront of kind of the relative lack of value at the running back position. They won a Super Bowl with a committee of Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount, Corey Clement. Hadn't used, I don't think, a third-round pick or higher on a running back since 2009, way back with LaShawn McCoy. So I think it spoke volumes to me that they go up and they use a second rounder on Miles Sanders. And to me, his profile looks like someone who could lead a committee. Of course, all these teams are playing with committees now. The question to me isn't will there be a committee? It's how much can the 1A part of the committee separate. So tell me what you think about Miles Sanders in Philly.
He certainly has the upside to be a lead back in the NFL, but there was a time where Jay Ajayi was considered that as well. So the thing with Miles Sanders is that you're going to have to be patient with him, even though he was a second round pick. And the reason I believe that is that his ball security is awful. I mean, if you look at you look at his first few years, I believe that he was averaging a fumble every 36 attempts. Or 36 touches. And then after the final year, it was one every 50. Which was pretty awful. So he has a real issue with that. Now, Sony Michel, as we saw, also had an issue, and he was able to only fumbled once last year. So he was able to fix that. But Sanders is a guy who, because he's only played limited amount of times as a starter, you have to be a little bit more concerned about that. In addition to the fact that he played behind Saquon Barkley, and being in Saquon Barkley's shadow, he sometimes tried a little too hard to do things that only Barkley can do. So he has to mature a little bit as a player, and pass protection is always a different animal when you come into the league. So when you look at Jordan Howard, he is a good pass protector. He is a secure carrier of the football, and he's a smart, tough, durable runner now behind a really good offensive line. So I think it's going to be a little tougher this year for Sanders to break in and suddenly be the lead back unless Jordan Howard has more shoulder issues, and shoulder issues can linger for a back and become worse. So there's a little upside downside for Sanders with this. I think long-term it's a good pick, but this year I wouldn't get overly excited about him.
Okay. Let's move to the player who, this has to be the story of the draft from a fantasy perspective. The Tyreek Hill news breaks as the draft is starting, and all of a sudden there's this massive hole. And we don't know if Tyreek Hill is going to be suspended yet. I assume for now that he's going to be suspended for the whole year. If we're operating under that assumption, there is now a massive, massive hole on a offense which led the entire league in yards per play last year, has arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, certainly the best fantasy quarterback. in the NFL last year. And also, Kansas City's defense, despite the moves they've made, I would still expect them to be pretty bad, which is obviously good for receiving stats. So anyways, with all that in the backdrop, the Chiefs take Mecole Hardman in the second round. Took him above a bunch of guys that I think by most people's lists and rankings, he was way behind some of the guys they passed on to take Mecole Hardman. Did they try too hard to find a Tyreek Hill clone, or can Mecole Hardman kind of replicate what Tyreek Hill gave them?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure as a case study here. I think that they found a guy who definitely fits a lot of what Tyreek Hill does, but he will never be the elite player Hill is, because Hill can win the ball in tight coverage in certain ways that Hardman can't. And he's actually a natural running back who converted to wide receiver, whereas Hardman is more of a quarterback who converted to wide receiver. The difference between the two at this stage will probably be that Hardman can win the ball in tight coverage plays on timing routes like back shoulder fades, but he's not going to create those off-script acrobatic catches in tight coverage where he really has to work around a defender and deal with physical play. He seems to consistently drop those types of targets that go his way, and he has to learn to get off press coverage, which is something that Hill had, developed pretty quickly at doing. For all of his flaws as a human being. One thing he did as a wide receiver, if we compartmentalize that, is that he was really quick at developing as a wide receiver, and that's rare. Hardman I like, but it's going to take more players than Hardman to fill that hole. And I would have preferred to see them get other players who maybe can do more outside as route runners and play inside. But it's not a bad pick, but it's not going to fulfill the Hill role. He'll probably, at best, he might be a high-end wide receiver too for fantasy owners.
I'm curious who you would have taken if you were the Chiefs in that spot and you wanted to go wide out there.
I think I would have taken one of two players. The first is Paris Campbell. I think, even though people will say, well, he's a raw player too, I don't think he's raw. I just think he's inexperienced with certain types of routes. The skills that he exhibits as a route runner transfer to the most difficult types of routes, and he's very good at adjusting to the football. I think that he could give you what Sammy Watkins will struggle to do because he can't stay healthy enough with that, foot and ankle issues that he's had since Buffalo. So I think that he gives you that versatility outside, inside, whereas Hardman, I don't know if he gives it to you in the way Hill does to an extent, but not as much as a route runner right now. And the other player is Hakeem Butler, who I just think, is an excellent player who can also play inside, outside, and give you that win the ball in the air skill that, when you're Patrick Mahomes and you can trust a guy like Travis Kelce the way he did on third downs and in the fourth quarter to throw the ball, throw the receiver open, you'd like to see him have more targets who can do that, but also run routes as expected, and Butler offers both of that.
I want to stick on Butler for a second here. He wasn't on our list here to talk about, but I'm curious if you have a read on why he fell so far in the draft. Cardinals chose Andy Isabella long before they chose Hakeem Butler. It seemed like there was a disconnect between the NFL and a lot of the analytics or Twitter people that I respect. It seemed like there was a big disconnect there. Do you have any idea why on Hakeem Butler?
Yeah, I think I can speculate what that is. And one of it, again, is just the main concept that, again, receivers have more grade variation in the NFL from team to team than any other position. And part of that is that teams are looking for specific things from receivers, because receivers are either slot, split end, flanker, or they play any of those 2 to 3 combinations. So if you're filtering your list, because they're not looking at 80 receivers like I am, they're looking at, let's filter it down to 12 to 15 players at most who can do this, and this. And that may mean that, well, a guy like Dante Pettis is a good example, guy who I rated number 1 last year. Pettis can play flanker, but he also can play slot and split end. But if you look at him solely as a slot player, do you want a big slot or a small slot? And where does he fit in those? He might be higher as a big slot for some teams, but lower for others because they want size more than they want, than they're worried about technical skill, or they're looking for speed over something else. So that's part of it. The other issue is that Hakeem Butler dropped the ball a good bit in college. One of the issues there is that teams don't oftentimes aren't great at differentiating what a drop is and what it means to a team. And, it's one of the things that I do, because when you look at drops, you're looking at whether it's a focus drop, whether it's just simply you didn't look the ball in totally as you're turning upfield. That's the easiest one to fix. Brandon Marshall had those issues. Chad Johnson had those issues. There are a number of players that Terrell Owens had those issues, and they continue to, but they were productive because teams knew that they could continue to target them on several different types of routes. It wasn't a route specific issue. It was just a concentration thing, and he would make up for it, make a big play.
Yeah.
Hakeem Butler has that issue, but there are other types of drop issues that are harder to fix. And that can also force teams or quarterbacks to lose confidence in throwing to that player because they know he's not going to track the ball on that specific route well, or his hands are not very good on low routes because he doesn't know how to use the right technique. So I think those were the issues that dropped him more than anything, was just the variation of how he might fit with the team as well as the drops.
Yeah. All right. We're going to save the rest of the Arizona stuff for the listener question portion of the program because I do want to get into Arizona a decent amount. I think that's really interesting. Let's continue on here with a few players that I think are in interesting spots. David Montgomery landed in Chicago, and we know they have Tariq Cohen. We know they signed Mike Davis. I think all three will play, and I think it's a question of how far can David Montgomery separate from Mike Davis. I think that's going to be largely up to David Montgomery. How do you think he'll fare in this battle with Mike Davis?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an underrated battle because Mike Davis is a pretty darn good running back, even though, fantasy players may not be as familiar with him. He should have been a top pick out of South Carolina if he played like he did his junior year. If he played that way as like a senior year, he would have been probably no more than a third round pick rather than a late round guy with San Francisco who ended up having to bounce around. But he's a really good cutback runner. He's a little more mature than Montgomery at this point in terms of decision making. So when it comes to dealing with penetration in the backfield or defenders shooting gaps, Mike Davis is better at being able to get it downhill in an efficient way, whereas Montgomery's more creative, more agile, but he may caused himself some touches early on if he tries to make bigger plays out of things than he shouldn't and ends up being a little too tentative. So that's the downside. The upside is that he's as good of a receiver as Davis. He is more creative, so he may be able to create more opportunities there. And he's actually a little more powerful and has a little lower center of gravity. So, with a good camp, he could close the door on Davis early. But if he makes rookie mistakes, which you have to count on even for good players, it's probably going to keep Davis in the equation. So I think what most likely happens here is that you're picking Montgomery for next year or the year after more than you're picking him for this year.
Let's move to the Patriots, who for the second straight year used their first-round draft pick on a skill player. This time it was N'Keal Harry. N'Keal Harry broke out in a big way at a young age at Arizona State, tested beautifully, really well in contested catches. I think if we assume Josh Gordon is not going to play this year, which we don't know yet, but if we assume that, I mean, N'Keal Harry's road to playing time is just wide open given the state of the Patriots pass catching corps. I would note that they didn't even draft a tight end. I would thought for sure they would draft a tight end. They decided not even to do that. So it's really barren behind 33-year-old Julian Edelman. Can N'Keal Harry step in right away and be productive for this Patriots offense?
He can, and I think it really comes down to the mental side of the game. If he can adapt and really be on the same page with Tom Brady and make sure that he understands all the different calls and moves and switching around to different spots, then he's going to be fine because he's a guy who needs that structure around him to move into good matchup situations because he's not a great separator at the line of scrimmage in terms of his techniques. He needs to get better at that. He can get better at it, but he's not a classic split end or a classic flanker as much as he is a big slot receiver. So he's kind of like a Michael Thomas in a sense, but maybe not as refined as a route runner. Thomas was just a little slower, so that's why they move him around. Whereas Harry is maybe fast enough, but he's just not quite technically refined enough, and we'll see if he can develop that way. The interesting part with New England is that pretty much every receiver on their roster who's of value is in the final year of their contract. And because, like you said, they didn't draft that tight end, you wonder if they're going to run the ball a lot more, if they're going to try and focus on that now that you add Damian Harris as that redundancy plan.
Yeah.
So Harry, to me, does seem like a guy that they'll feel like, okay, we can put Edelman on the outside when we need to find a matchup for Harry. So I expect him to get a lot of targets this year.
Yeah, and I totally agree that New England projects as one of the more run-heavy teams in the league this year. I'd also say that, Josh Gordon came in and immediately averaged over 7 targets per game. I mean, they didn't wait to break him in really at all. He came in off the street and 7 targets per game from Tom Brady right away in his full game. So if N'Keal Harry can get his head on straight, I don't think Tom Brady's going to be like, he's a rookie, I'm not throwing to him. I don't think he has that luxury whatsoever.
No, he did that with a guy like, what's his name? Tompkins, who was the rookie undrafted free agent. I mean, he targeted him and Dobson forever, even though those guys dropped the ball like crazy. He worked to them and expected them to do well, and then when they didn't, they had to move it around.
You mentioned Paris Campbell before, who is a player who everybody killed him for having the lowest ADOT, average depth of target, in like all of college football, like pathetic, like 3 yards. I'm not sure that means that he can't develop a wider route tree. He certainly has the physical makeup to do it. He tested absolutely off the charts. It is really crowded in Indy. They do have Devin Funchess, they have T.Y. Hilton, they have Naheem Hines, they have Jack Doyle, they have Eric Ebron, but Paris Campbell certainly fits with the Colts as well. Where do you see the upside coming in with Paris Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, I see strong upside for him because T.Y. Hilton's in the final year of his deal. Devin Funchess is a 1-year contract player and basically kind of an insurance policy, I think, to give Deion Kane another year to really rehab that knee fully, because he was looking like he might be a starter heading into camp before his ACL injury. So when you look at it from that perspective, certainly Paris Campbell has a future. And while I certainly appreciate, looking at metrics to a certain degree, you have to contextualize them to an extent and understand how it works in the offense. And that offense was basically, he was a running back in the offense, when you look at how that he was used. And when he did run pass routes that were worthwhile, the sample size is small, but again, even the metrics that are used oftentimes don't have a big enough sample size to actually correlate with anything meaningful from a rigorous statistical standpoint. So we're looking at things and trying to project them with what we know. And so when whether it's film or stats. And so from a film standpoint, you look at that and say, listen, he can run routes, he can catch the ball, he adjusts well, he's great after the catch. They're going to find, he's someone that projects well to develop into a player who will exceed his ADOT average.
Yeah. I think so as well. All right. You mentioned you were extremely high on Dante Pettis last year. Considering the situation, Dante Pettis, cold rookie, thrust due to injuries, thrust into the number 1 role, playing with Nick Mullins. I mean, he just balled out last year. I think it's pretty clear he is the number 1 receiver for them, but they have big holes. I think they knew they needed to upgrade on Marquise Goodwin, couldn't trust his health, wasn't versatile enough. They go ahead and take Deebo Samuel, I believe in the 2nd round, very high pick on Deebo Samuel. Were you surprised they went that high on Deebo Samuel? They basically already announced that he will be a starter. They don't really have much of a choice. And they also have Jalen Hurd, who I know you like too. So how do you see this 49ers receiver core shaking out?
It might be the most versatile receiving core in the NFL at this stage, because when you look at what Pettis and Samuel can do, they can each play all 3 positions. You have Hurd, who can also work in the slot as well as outside, and a little bit of running back, obviously, too. And then you have the slot receivers like Richie James, who can play a little flanker if need be, even work out of the backfield some. So this is a diverse, versatile offense with a lot of skill talent. And Samuel, to me, was a top 5 receiver. And he looked like a guy who had a grade near to being an instant starter. So it makes sense for me that he would be there. And they're probably going to try and use him as a split end. Hopefully he can separate well enough with his hands. That's going to be the issue. He's going to have to work on a little bit more. He's got great footwork. So I expect him to make big plays. Be able to be a force underneath and earn yards after the catch. And that will help open things up for a guy like Pettis, who they can move around a little bit if they stick Samuel out there, or if they decide to move any of these guys around. If they all catch, kind of are quick on the uptake with being versatile, this could be really a lot of fun in terms of an offense to watch if the offensive line can keep Jimmy Garoppolo upright.
Yeah, and I think you have to be optimistic about what Kyle Shanahan was able to do with Nick Mullins and then translate that to somebody with far more natural skills like Jimmy Garoppolo. And they certainly added pieces to the running back room. They have George Kittle. I agree with you on the wide receiver room. It's an exciting team, I think, out there in San Francisco, at least for fantasy. All right. Probably the most disappointing landing spot for a lot of people was Marquise Hollywood Brown landing with the Ravens. For me, I was kind of hoping, I don't know. I mean, I'm no scout, but to me, a 166-pound guy coming off of a Liz Frank would be such an outlier to be an elite fantasy wide receiver. Like, you're basically saying, oh, this guy is a 1 in 100 player or something like that. And maybe Marquise Brown is. It just seemed like it was trending badly for me on him anyways. But now everybody's off him because he went to the Ravens. And I've seen him go in like the second round of rookie dynasty drafts, even though he was the first wide receiver off the board. So is the landing spot, I guess, as bad as the market has initially perceived on Marquise Brown?
Well, it's funny because what you mentioned about being, a light receiver with a Liz Frank injury, that's the first thing my buddy Gene Bramall, who at Football Guys brought up, who's, an injury analyst and a doctor. So, it's one of the first things that he brought up. But I think, the thing is he that 1 in 100 type of receiver who gets drafted in this situation? We're about to find out. I think skills wise, yes. Whether he can hold up health wise, Deshaun Jackson really hasn't even held up consistently throughout his career enough to be the player that he's capable of. So you're going to see flashes there. But I like the scheme fit more than most people. And I think part of that is that there's a real bias against Lamar Jackson, because when you look at the data of his games, they don't match up well with the contextualized look of the film. Because when you actually look at what he does on film, I think he was arguably the best pocket passer of the rookies in this class in terms of hanging in the pocket, finding additional reads. But because he has the legs and he's a guy that went from being, a concept, basically working in an offense in high school where he had to really learn Bobby Petrino's offense. And it was a long road, but he did it very quickly. But he still had a ways to go in terms of verbiage and understanding certain concepts. The fact that he grew as much as he did from high school through college should be enough for people to understand that he will be able to make that transition in the pros, but it just took him a little bit more time. But in terms of his natural skills, in terms of hanging in the pocket, finding the next read, not moving too wildly like Michael Vick did, or even like Kyler Murray does at certain points, he's great in that respect. And when they took the shackles off him late in the Chargers game, he nearly brought them back. And he showed the things that people throughout the game that I was watching the game with were complaining that he wasn't good at. There's a real bias about the fact that he runs the football and that he's, and that he's still a little bit more on the development side conceptually, that they think he's more Michael Vick-like when he's not. Michael Vick even said, Lamar Jackson is way better than I ever was at the same point when we were in college. And that's true. I saw both of those guys. And I didn't see Michael Vick when I was like 16 and didn't care about this stuff. I was literally analyzing the game when Michael Vick came in here. So I understand the context pretty well. And I'd say that Brown and Boykin are really exciting plays. And I think that they're going to be able to mix. They were trying to be cautious because they couldn't give, due to deference to Flacco, they couldn't give Jackson the kind of acclimation time and opportunities and practice reps he needed last year. So as a result of that, they said, what's he do best? Well, he runs the ball. We can use option and throw off of that. So we're going to make the offenses simple, but it's going to be difficult to defend because we're going to, defenses are going to have a tough time defending it. And then when they found the option to do that, the Chargers went that extreme. Well, it kind of put them on a corner because they went too conservative, but that wasn't Jackson's fault. That was the coaching staff's fault. In the same way, it wasn't Goff's fault last year in the Super Bowl. It was Sean McVay's fault for having the hubris to think he can run basically a handful of plays against Bill Belichick, the chess master. So people sometimes forget that kind of stuff. So I like Brown all right. I actually like Boykin better long term, but short term, Brown and his ability to get in the middle of the field if he's healthy enough is going to be a big play factor in the middle of the field.
Yeah, I think it's scary if you use last year's metrics, like you said. I mean, Lamar Jackson only attempted like 22.5 passes per game and only completed 58% of those or something. So when you're only looking at, 11 or 12, 13 completions per game, it's really hard to project any pass catchers for a sizable role. But an entire offseason to restructure the offense around Lamar Jackson, it's gotten to the point where people are just like, I'm not touching Boykin, I'm not touching Brown. I think there could be some value there as well.
You might as well be giving up. You might as well be giving up something valuable at a garage sale. I mean, it's like, or shopping at Goodwill in a rich neighborhood. I mean, basically, you're going to get brand name clothes there. And you're going to get quality stuff. It's just that people are coming off of it for whatever reason. They got too fat on something else, I guess.
Last guy I want to hit here, I added late because I think it's an interesting situation. LaShawn McCoy, the Bills can save $6 million by cutting him. They've added Frank Gore, they've added TJ Yeldon, then they make what seems to be a luxury pick with Devin Singletary. It's an interesting running back room, because I think the Bills are going to be better than people realize. What did you think about Devin Singletary, and can he kind of fight his way to the top here? Does he have that kind of profile?
I'm one that often champions outlier situations. I've definitely been known for that and had some success with it on occasion. And when you look at Frank Gore, he was probably one of those players I championed a long time ago, who Fergus Conley, who worked at the University of Michigan and with the 49ers, writes a book called Game Changer, told me that, Frank Gore was like the best slow player he's ever seen, in terms of skills. And he is the model for that running back coaches use to teach people how to run the football when they come from the college game to the pro game. He's that good. But I don't think I need Devin Singletary to prove it on the field before I feel good about him, because his vision is fantastic. He's got great peripheral vision. He understands how to time angles and really set them up with variation of speed or pacing. And he has excellent footwork. And so technically he's really sound. Conceptually he's really sound. But physically he's slow. He doesn't have great change of direction speed. He doesn't have great acceleration. He's short and he's small. Mm-hmm. So, you look at all of these things together, and I don't see many compensating factors for that vision. If his vision can literally be a compensating factor for all of these, minuses in his physical resume, then all power to him. But I'm not advising anyone to draft Devin Singletary, despite the fact that the Bills have an up-and-coming offensive line, and especially in the fact that Gore still is making fantasy players mad. He's the grumpy old man of fantasy right now. And then you have TJ Yeldon, who's improved a fair bit since his first couple years in Jacksonville. He probably could have gotten a better gig somewhere else. I think so. Singletary going to have to prove it. I'm going to wait and see.
All right, let's move to the listener questions portion of the program. We're going to do 5 of them here. First one is from great friend of the show, one of the best friends of the show, Evan Silva. He says, how does he see Hakeem Butler, Andy Isabella, Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, and Keyshawn Johnson fitting into Cliff Kingsbury's offense? And how deep into air raid spread can Cliff get in the program with different hash marks, concepts, protections, etc.? Everybody's excited about Arizona's offense. It's hard not to be. Anything would be better than last year. I believe they were 31st in the league in yards per play last year. It was just totally inept from Mike McCoy. We do expect them to be vastly improved. I think the question is, and maybe a good test case, can you run true air raid spread, whatever that means, in the NFL, and how do all these new pieces fit?
Well, I think we're going to find out a little bit, but I would expect that they're going to transition to that to a degree. I'm interested myself to see whether or not, the hash marks are going to make a difference. But, the way I look at it is, if you get receivers too wide outside to an extent, that you're kind of giving them defenders an opportunity to ride them up the boundary. And because coverage is a little bit better, is a lot better in the NFL, I think that you're not going to be able to get the full version of it. I don't think that that's going to happen. But I do think that you're going to be able to see certain concepts that have already been in the league for a while. And they're just going to use them more often. And it's going to be about, using personnel to their advantage and finding matchups for them. But it's interesting to me who those players are going to be. Like we talked about earlier, who's going to be the slot receiver? It seems like there's like 4 guys vying for that position, and they're all like, I don't want to be the outside guy. I mean, I would say, you know, you look at Larry Fitzgerald and you go, can he still get the separation he needs to? And is Kyler Murray going to trust him enough or have the accuracy to really throw him open in a way that quarterbacks aren't taught to do? You know, especially as a first-year player with a veteran like Fitzgerald. So that's an issue for me. I think this year is really boom bust. I think that I don't care what scheme it is. I don't care whether the line splits are wider, and that may help on some level, or they think it will conceptually. The fact of the matter is you still, in the NFL, the difference between the NFL and the college game is that it's even more a one-on-one game at every level. And as a result of that, the NFL defenders always are the superior athletes. And if you're thinking your scheme is going to somehow beat those one-on-one matchups, but you don't have the supporting staff to do it up front, then you're going to be sadly mistaken, because even the teams that incorporated some of these zone reads and read option looks, the key was to see, we have one guy we're trying to get to run 2 steps this way, or to back up that way, or to bite on this fake. And if they do that, then we have the man-on-man advantage. But if you're just saying we're gonna spread the field and we're gonna split things up and we're gonna hopefully be able to get things out quickly, but now you're giving defenders a quicker opportunity to the quarterback, then now you've got Kyler Murray, who, as good as he is in terms of his accuracy, as good as he is at being able to climb in rhythm forward to throw the ball like Josh Allen was, he's also like Josh Allen in the sense that when pressure comes in a direction that's off an angle or up the middle to a certain extent that forces him to move to a side, he kind of flits to that side instead of sliding the way you see Tom Brady, you just calmly use the footwork like a boxer to move one way and then just throw the ball in rhythm to that open receiver as the progression comes open. Kyler Murray's more like the road runner, where he just kind of goes to that other direction. Now he's off balance, and now the defender's coming this way. He already missed that throw, so now he's got to go back this way, and the same thing happened because he missed that progression again. Next thing you know, he has to make an extremely difficult play to actually succeed, or he has to run the ball. Yeah. And as a result, also, because he holds the ball basically like a track star, you know, like holds a baton, it doesn't look good this year. I think it's a situation where we're waiting for year 2, and we'll see signs of life, maybe early, or maybe for the next 5 to 6 games, you know, late in the season, but not wire to wire. I think there's going to be moments of near disaster at certain points.
I've seen a lot of different projections on Kyler Murray's rushing numbers in the NFL. You've obviously watched him a lot. I've seen projections that he's going to be the best runner in NFL history. He's going to be right there with Lamar Jackson in rushing numbers. Then I've seen projections where, he might only rush for 400 yards or something standard, like a Russell Wilson type runner. How do you think where his rushing stats will come in? Because it's just so valuable in fantasy for your quarterback to be able to run with the football a lot.
Yeah, I think it's between kind of Lamar and Russell Wilson, kind of in the 600, 700 yard range is probably where he's going to be year 1. And hopefully we'll calm down from that, because unlike those two guys, while he often says, hey, I avoid pressure like Russell Wilson and I avoid getting hit like Russell Wilson. Yes, to an extent, but Russell Wilson still takes a lot of hits, and Russell Wilson came into the league in the 200-pound range. Mm-hmm. You know, Murray weighed over 200 pounds at a weigh-in and didn't work out. So that tells me usually what that is scout-wise is I can't play at this weight right now. It's going to take me a year to year and a half to actually sustain that weight probably. I'm probably going to be about 190, 195 by the middle to the end of the season. And then on top of that, he doesn't process the game as fast as Russell Wilson did at this stage of his career. He's good, but he's not that good. So I think that he will have to lean on his legs an awful lot this year, and he's going to take some hits that will test his durability. So, you know, I anticipate that I would recommend people to draft Kyler Murray at the end of drafts if you are looking for upside, but you better have a plan in terms and understand that you're not expecting him to be your starter for more than a stretch of games and hoping that it will be at the stretch run, and that's it.
Yeah, I think Arizona will be one of the most interesting teams to watch, certainly early in the year. They do have, I mean, all these guys, Isabella and Christian Kirk and Akeem Butler and Kyler. I mean, they have a lot of pieces that I think people are excited about, but we'll see how it comes together. Question 2 comes from Justin Linero, another friend of the show. Simple question. He says, ask Matt how he knew Nick Chubb would be so good at the next level. What did you love about Nick Chubb coming in?
Because basically I've spent, since 2006 studying, these 4 positions and really defining the criteria that I look at for the position. And one of the things that I look at for the position that's important is that vision isn't just some nebulous term. It's literally broken down into several components of decision-making and peripheral vision and understanding how it ties into footwork and to blocking scheme and the down and distance scenarios. And when I watched Nick Chubb, what I understood right away is that in addition to his just fantastic athletic ability, even though it declined ever so slightly after the knee injury, is that he was the best decision-making runner in the class without a shadow of a doubt. He was on the level of Ezekiel Elliott as a decision maker. And with his footwork, you could just see that. And one of the things that people don't understand is that when they look at studying running backs, they often are looking for gains as opposed to looking for decisions. And so a classic example of that is I remember being on Twitter during the Giants preseason game against the Browns, and Chubb was running in the second quarter and the third quarter with the second and third team offensive line, which wasn't very good. And he wasn't getting a lot of yards. Everybody was talking about what a bust he was and how he wasn't worth being even a second round pick. And I'm looking at the tape and thinking he's making good decision after good decision. And he was actually doing what he needed to do within that scheme. And it's the same reasons why I had Matt Forte higher than most, why I had Joseph Adai higher than most, why Ahmad Bradshaw higher than most, is that I could watch games where they average less than a yard per carry against a top defense where it's overwhelmed. And if the decision-making is good and the athletic skill is strong and the footwork is sharp, then you know that this is a good player. And he was the highest graded back I've had in the past, 5 years.
And I think Nick Chubb turned out last year to be PFF's top graded running back in the entire league, obviously earning the feature back role for what should be a very exciting Browns offense this year. Let's move to question 3 here from Felix Sharp. He says, ask Matt if he believes that Deontay Johnson is a better player than his athletic testing would indicate. This one is interesting to me because the Steelers have such a long history of finding these wide receivers in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Juju. I mean, they just have such a strong record drafting wide receivers. Deontay Johnson, I think, surprised people because 5'10", 183 with 4.53 speed. You don't often see that combination in the 3rd round. Have the Steelers uncovered another gem here?
He's an interesting guy because, his junior year, I watched him in his junior year, and I probably had him, I don't do kind of the as you go rankings and televise how my rankings change. But kind of behind the scenes, I had him in my top 10 to top 15 as a junior, but then watching his senior tape and seeing more of his route running, seeing more of his work against top competition, against press coverage, his consistency in terms of how he attacked the football, none of it was consistent, and he dropped pretty far down my board. The thing about him that's interesting is he has that spark, and I'm going to try and objectify it a little bit more than the way I've just described it. But he has that spark or it factor that a lot of analytics people hate hearing the word for, that Sanders and Brown had and Juju Smith-Schuster had. And what I mean by that is that he has a feel for understanding how to integrate various concepts on the field and be able to find solutions to problems on the field when something goes wrong. And he does it quickly and finds a successful play out of it. If you were to track those types of plays, you could track those plays and label them as such. And I bet if you did that with every player, you'd find that he was above average in that respect. But the issue for me is the consistency factor, again, with the hardcore technical skills that didn't show up in his game, week in and week out, and didn't do it against top competition. So I understand exactly what the Steelers saw in him and why they wanted to move forward with him, because they see the elements that kind of factor that they saw common to the other three players that you cited. But at the same time, let's remember, Pittsburgh also acquired Justin Hunter. Mm-hmm. They also acquired Darius Hayward-Bay. Mm-hmm. They've also acquired, they've acquired other players who aren't consistent at the catch point, aren't consistent runners, and route runners, and are guys who have difficulty maybe getting off press coverage as well, who are athletically interesting, but may not have been as strong either in those respects. So as much as we praise them for those three guys, there are some other guys on there that you go, why did you even acquire them to have them on your roster?
Yeah, and they certainly have a lot of misses too. I'm curious how you would compare just from a who would you rather have, who would win between Deontay Johnson and James Washington? Because right now, I mean, James Washington, I believe, is penciled in as a starter, if not Dante Moncrief.
Yeah, and there's another guy, Dante Moncrief, who belongs on that list, who's mainly a guy who kind of runs good routes and sometimes looks like he can catch the ball. So it's he's good enough that people look at him as promising, and it's almost like they go, oh, let's get him in here. Wasn't he a good prospect at one time? Kind of addition. But I would say, Johnson has the athletic advantage, I think, in terms of the speed and the skill at being able to separate. But I think that in terms of just athletic ability, but I think Washington, with a year under his belt, in addition to the fact that he was a more refined player and really separated well at the Senior Bowl, using a lot of good technique, and he's also much better at the things that Johnson has to work on, I'm going to give the edge to Washington.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to question 4 from Laxatives Murray. Interesting name there. He says, how do you value relative draft capital? For example, UDFAs versus 5th, 6th, and 7th rounders. Big difference or pretty similar impact on your outlook? I think draft capital is something that even a lower grade or people that aren't that into fantasy have realized is extremely important. Draft capital says a lot about how a player is going to perform on his first contract. However, is there really a difference between a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick and a UDFA?
Most times, no, and I agree with you about draft capital. I think the person who was really the strongest proponent of this early on was a gentleman who played in the NFL by the name of Ryan Riddle, who wrote a Bleacher Report way back in the day. Who wrote a book, an article that I still reference called "The Hidden Advantage of Being an Early Round Draft Pick," which just kind of talks about the biases that are involved with this. But when you're in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, basically what you are is a UDFA who didn't get to choose their team, for the most part. Now, there are certain 5th or 6th round picks who will get that opportunity, get extended opportunities. But the difference is this, is the way you look at it is you have to look at it in phases, is that all the late round picks in training camp, if they're just basically they're all getting minimal reps. So they're all going to have the bias against them for those minimal reps that they're getting, because coaches are looking at them and going, when they get those 4 reps in the period and they make a mistake on one of them, they go, see, he couldn't play. Whereas the guy who gets 10 reps in the period, who's the early round pick, who was overdrafted, makes 5 mistakes, they go, oh, he'll get better. He just needs to work on it. That's literally one of the biases that happen. Mm-hmm. But if they start really playing well and they start to get elevated, and you start hearing about them getting second team reps and first team reps, and they're getting more reps and more high profile reps, then you start to separate them that way. Then the next step is, are they getting opportunities in the preseason, not in the second quarter or the third quarter, but in the first quarter or with the starters? And are they making plays with those? And if they start making plays with those and they're still getting first team reps, then you can separate them further. So that's how I do it, is kind of as the season goes on.
Yeah. And for me, I try not to judge talent because I can't do it like you can do it. But one way that I can see who is going to get opportunity is by tracking so hard the news in the preseason. Like you said, some people might just brush off X players getting first team reps. To me, that's one of the biggest news out of preseason. And then all the preseason games, I go through and chart and figure out exactly who was on the field with the starting unit. And I think that, leads to a really big edge. Yeah. Okay. Last question we're going to do today comes from Robbie. He says Jace Sternberger taking snaps from Jimmy Graham in year one or more of a developmental project. Jimmy Graham last year had plenty of opportunity. Looked like he was, I don't know. I don't know if he's done. I don't know if he can't move anymore. I don't know. He complained that he wasn't being used the right way. I don't know what's going on with Jimmy Graham. Either way, do you think Jace Sternberger is a threat to him up there in Green Bay?
I don't think any of us know really what's going on there, especially after the Ty Dunn piece and then James Jones rebuttal and all of what's going on there. You could totally see where either Jimmy Graham's done physically or that he just gave up because he was so tired of what was going on with this offense and the dysfunction that he was basically despondent and dispirited because, people will say, well, you shouldn't do that being this highly paid and what you do in the NFL. And I agree with that. But human nature is I've certainly managed a number of 20 and early 30 and 40 and even 50 and 60-year-olds who, when they didn't like the situation or they had to work in a difficult scenario, that they just gave up in their day job. And listen, they had kids to support, they had mortgages to pay, and they had cars that might get taken away if they got fired, but they didn't care because they were emotionally too attached to the situation. So I could see that scenario being Jimmy Graham's outlook, but I'm not counting on it that way. I think he's slowed down. I think that what's going to happen here is they're going to hope that their receivers are enough to where they don't have to detach Jimmy Graham from the formation except in special situations, and they'll use Mercedes Lewis as an inline blocker this year on the 1-year contract. He's still a good blocker, even though he's in the twilight of his career. And Sternberger is more of a development guy who will make quick strides. And by next year, you're going to get a high upside player. So I think he's worth drafting in the second or third round of rookie dynasty leagues. But I think that he's, again, more of a patience play for you. And if you can get him a little bit later, because you probably get him in the 4th or 5th round in a lot of leagues, you need to go for that because it's going to be a nice bargain. He might have a better career than a guy like Noah Fant, who, as good as he is athletically, fights the ball a little bit. It's kind of like the Cortland Sutton of tight ends. And, in the fact that he needs to work a little bit more on route running, a little bit more on using his hands correctly to catch the football. Lots of promise, but needs to continue to work at it.
Yeah, that's a sore subject around here. There's some people who've been in this podcast lost a lot of money on Cortland Sutton. So that's
they should have listened to me, man.
Yeah, I know.
I had to rate him 20th last year.
Ay. All right. It's not good for Peter's Broncos. Okay.
Sorry, fellas.
All right. Matt has said it all. We've learned a ton. Matt, tell the people where they can find. First of all, why don't you tell them what RSP is, and then tell them where they can find it if they want to buy it.
Yeah, the Rookie Scouting Portfolio is a draft publication that's geared also towards fantasy users. It's literally it's a PDF that the pre-draft version has 1,081 pages this year. It takes you through my process in a very transparent way. You'll probably read about 300 of them. It's all bookmarked with rankings, with skill breakdowns at specific types of skills each position looks at, and underrated, overrated types of plays, full profiles on these players, as well as a look at each position and kind of the recent draft history. You also get a post-draft edition with it, which is what I'm working on, right now, which is going to be about 120 to 150 pages. It gives you a cheat sheet that looks at ADP of recent dynasty drafts after the NFL draft and compares that to the way I've re-ranked them based on team fit, and helps you find the sweet spot based on tiered cheat sheets to where you can get the most value for these guys. So if I like I like Patrick Mahomes as the top quarterback, 2 years ago in that draft, I showed you where you could get him to get the most value for him. Or Nick Chubb, I liked him slightly ahead of Saquon Barkley, as crazy as that seemed. Didn't mean I told you to draft him number 1 overall. So I show you how to kind of go about doing that. And in addition to all of that, and depth chart analysis and contract analysis that I do with all of these players and where they go into these situations, you also get my newsletter, which comes out monthly, June through December, that keeps you up to date and re-ranks these players in August as well as in November. 3 years worth of rookie classes that are re-ranked, and you get some looks at some of the 2020 class, and that's all for $21.95. And 10% goes to an organization called Darkness to Light, which is an organization that is dedicated to preventing sexual abuse in communities through teaching adults how to recognize situations that may be dangerous, as well as how to address it when it unfortunately does happen, so it doesn't compound the effect on the victim.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work there, Matt. You're a busy guy.
Right.
You didn't give the most important part. How do they go and find him? Give them your Twitter, the YouTube, the website. You got to give it. You got to give it to them all.
I got to. You can find me at Matt Waldman, WALDMAN on Twitter. Mm-hmm. You can find the RSP and just order it at mattwaldman.com. Mm-hmm. And my YouTube channel is Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room. You can check out over 300 videos that I've done there on that channel. And my site is mattwaldmanrsp.com.
There you go. Now you guys have it all. Go check out the RSP. Well worth your time and your money. Really appreciate Matt coming on. I know it's a very busy time for him. For Jerry, for Matt, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.